I want you to imagine a quiet stretch of the American Midwest, where long, empty highways cut through miles of cornfields and forgotten towns. Imagine a roadside thrift store, dusty windows, flickering yellow lights, and shelves filled with abandoned furniture, old memories, and objects that should have been left alone. And inside one of those shelves, imagine a cardboard box full of VHS tapes. No covers, no titles, no explanations, just numbers written by a shaky hand. A box that shouldn't have been found. A box that should have stayed hidden. Tonight, we're going to talk about the man who found it. A man who loved nostalgia, old technology, and the past. But the past he discovered wasn't his, and on the last tape, he found himself.
Dark tales whispered at night.
Evan Porter was the kind of man who lived quietly, the kind of person whose life fit neatly inside routines. Long graveyard shifts on the highway, towing broken-down cars. Early mornings stopping at the same gas station for burnt coffee. Weekends spent wandering through thrift stores looking for old analog equipment. He liked things that didn't pretend to be more than they were. VHS tapes, film cameras, cassette decks. Objects from a world that felt slower, steadier, less chaotic. In a life where everything modern moved too fast, the past was the only thing he could keep in his hands. It was after one of those long nights on the interstate, the kind where the fog hangs low over the asphalt and the world feels empty, that Evan spotted a shop he swore hadn't been there before. The sign above it read, "Second Chances," its rusted letters barely hanging on. He felt something pull him toward the front door. Not curiosity exactly, but something softer, like nostalgia brushing the back of his mind. He stepped inside, letting the door groan shut behind him. The store was dim, cluttered, and smelled of dust and old fabric. Sunlight pushed through the blinds in thin, uneven stripes. Evan drifted toward the electronics section automatically, scanning the shelves for anything forgotten or rare. That was when he saw it. A cardboard box shoved halfway under a folding table, the edges bowed from age. Written on the side in faded marker were the words "Private Tapes, Not for Sale." Tape 2 showed a young man pushing a grocery cart through a parking lot, filmed from behind another row of cars. Tape 3 was a family eating dinner, filmed through a dining room window. On tape 4, a man sat on his porch reading a newspaper, completely unaware of the camera watching from across the street. There was no pattern, except one. The person filming stayed distant, patient, silent, always watching. By the time Evan reached tape 7, he leaned closer to the screen without realizing it. This footage was indoors, filmed through a cracked door into a dimly lit hallway. The camera tilted just slightly, capturing reflections in a glass frame on the wall opposite the room. That was when Evan saw it. A faint silhouette reflected in the glass, a tall figure holding the camera, the face obscured by the angle and a shadowed baseball cap. Just a glimpse, but enough to know that whoever filmed these tapes wasn't just a voyeur. He was inside people's homes. On tape 10, the pattern deepened. Bedrooms, bathrooms, hallways, all filmed from hiding places, cracks in the door, the gap beneath a bed frame. Behind curtains, Evan's stomach tightened. These weren't stolen moments in public. This was trespassing. This was someone stepping into people's lives when they were most vulnerable. He should have stopped, but he couldn't, not when the tapes began to feel like they were leading somewhere. Then came tape 15, the one that warned him not to watch. Evan pressed play. The screen stayed black for nearly 10 seconds, then static rippled across the glass. Slowly, an image emerged. At first, he didn't recognize the neighborhood, but the camera moved forward, walking steadily down a quiet sidewalk illuminated by flickering streetlights. The view tilted, zooming slightly, and Evan felt his breath catch in his throat. It was his street. The camera continued forward, approaching his apartment building. Evan's hands trembled. He whispered, "No, no way." But the tape kept moving. The lens climbed the stairwell, turned down the hallway, stopped at his door. The view shifted as the cameraman leaned in, pressing the lens to the pee-hole. A distorted, circular image filled the screen. Fisheye, grainy, warped. On the other side of the door, sleeping on the couch, was Evan himself.
He recoiled, heart pounding. He didn't remember any of this. Didn't remember hearing anyone outside. Didn't remember being filmed. The footage lingered on his sleeping body. Then the camera pulled back. A faint knock sounded on the tape. 3 slow knocks. On the screen, Evan watched himself stir, sit up, look toward the door. He hadn't remembered waking up. The tape cut suddenly. The VCR clicked loudly, ejecting the cassette halfway. The sound startled him into moving. He backed away, stumbling over the box of tapes, breath uneven. For several long minutes, he stood with his back pressed to the wall, staring at the black TV screen. Finally, his instincts kicked in. He grabbed his keys, grabbed the box, and drove back to the thrift store. At 2 a.m, the streets were empty, the fog thick. When he pulled up to the store, his headlights illuminated boarded windows, a padlocked door, and a faded "for lease" sign dangling sideways. The thrift store wasn't open. It wasn't even a store anymore. According to the dust layered across the floor inside, it hadn't been open in years. Evan stepped back, chest tight. He looked around the parking lot. Cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through seams. No sign of recent activity. His phone light illuminated the property records taped crookedly to the window. Store permanently closed. Lease expired 12 years ago. His breath hitched. He turned toward his truck. The box of tapes was gone. Only a few seconds had passed, but the passenger seat was empty and the door was still locked. Evan didn't remember the drive home. His mind swam, thoughts tangled and frantic. When he reached his apartment, he double-checked every lock, every window, every corner. But he didn't sleep.
Sometime before dawn, as the first pale light crept across the blinds, a faint clicking started in the living room. The mechanical click of a VHS tape being inserted into a VCR. Evan froze. The TV glowed softly. Someone had turned it on. Someone had pressed play. The screen showed the hallway of his apartment, filmed from behind him. He turned around slowly, and the tape cut to black. Evan stood motionless, the pale glow of the television flickering across his face as his mind scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. The footage on the screen wasn't old, it wasn't archival, it wasn't a memory, it was now. The hallway captured on the tape was the same hallway he stood in, every detail identical. The slightly crooked picture frame, the worn patch on the carpet where he always turned too quickly, the faint line of light leaking from the bathroom door. On the screen, the camera moved a fraction closer, the image trembling with each subtle step. The feeling of being watched pressed down on him like a weight. His breath caught in his throat as the camera angle shifted just enough for him to see the silhouette of a person standing behind the lens. Tall, broad-shouldered, unmoving. The figure did not speak. It did not breathe. It simply held the camera with a steadiness that felt inhuman. Evan forced himself to look away from the screen, to glance behind him, to search for the shape that should have been there. But the hallway was empty, silent, still. When he looked back at the TV, the screen was nothing but static. He stepped closer, almost against his will, as if drawn by some invisible thread. The static hissed softly, rising and falling like a whisper. He reached out to hit the power button, but the moment his finger neared the glass, the image shifted again. Now the footage showed his living room, filmed from somewhere near the ceiling, as if the camera had been placed high in the corner. On-screen Evan moved slowly, his present self visible in the recording as a faint outline approaching the TV. He watched himself watching himself, the layers of the moment folding in on each other in a way that made reality feel thin and fragile. A sudden knock shattered the silence. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, not from the TV, from his front door. Evan's stomach twisted. His pulse hammered behind his ears. He stared at the door from across the room, waiting for another knock, waiting for any hint of movement from the gap beneath the frame. Nothing came, not a sound, not a shadow. He inched forward, each step an effort. The air felt heavy, thick, as if the apartment itself resisted him approaching the door. When he finally reached it, he pressed his eye to the peephole with trembling hesitation. Darkness, no hallway lights, no shape, no movement, just an endless black circle staring back at him. He stepped away, shaken. Behind him, the TV sputtered, the static sharpening into a single distorted frame, the front door, filmed from the outside. Someone stood inches away from the peephole, their silhouette blurred but unmistakably human. The figure leaned in slowly, pressing its forehead against the door, as though listening for something inside. Then the tape jumped, sputtered, and the screen went black. Evan didn't sleep for days after that night. He kept every light in the apartment burning until the bulbs flickered from exhaustion. He checked the locks obsessively, deadbolt, chain, both secured, yet the feeling of being watched never left him. Sometimes he thought he heard faint footsteps in the hall outside. Other times, the soft, mechanical click of a tape deck starting somewhere too close to ignore. He got rid of his VCR, threw it into a dumpster 2 blocks away. But the next morning, it was sitting neatly, beside his apartment door, wiped clean of dust. The box of tapes never returned, but sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, he would spot a single VHS cassette placed somewhere new, on his coffee table, on the kitchen counter, once even resting against his pillow when he woke up. The labels were always blank, the reels inside always still. He never pressed play again, but the clicking, the faint, unmistakable sound of a tape sliding into a player, that never stopped. And sometimes, when he walked past the darkened screen of his TV, he swore he could see a reflection behind him. Someone tall, someone patient, someone waiting. Evan stopped collecting tapes after that, stopped visiting thrift stores, stopped trusting the comforting hum of nostalgia that had once been his escape. The past had followed him home, not in memories, not in relics, but in someone else's recordings. Someone who had filmed strangers for years. Someone who now filmed him. And the worst part was knowing the truth he could never prove. Whoever filmed those tapes was still filming.
If you've ever brought something home from a thrift store and felt like it carried a presence you couldn't explain, you're not alone. If these whispers followed you tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. It helps the channel survive the darkness. Share your story in the comments. I'm always listening. This was Dark Whispers, Sleep Stories. Good night, sweet dreams. Sleep well if you can.